I'm going to take a few minutes to talk about the reconciliation bill that we're discussing and debating on the Senate floor here this week, particularly the focus on repealing the Affordable Care Act, what's called Obamacare. And there's many, many aspects of the bill that we're debating: the individual mandate, the Cadillac tax, the employer mandate. These will all be gone. And essentially, we will start the process of what I believe the vast majority of Americans want, which is real affordable health care, not what we currently have. So I was recently home in Anchorage, Alaska, and you know, Madam President, a lot of us, we get a sense of what our constituents are feeling by just going about doing our basic chores and running errands when we're back home. In the course of 2 hours back home 2 weeks ago, getting gas at a grocery store, at Lowe's, I had 3 different Alaskans come up to me and plead to do something about Obamacare, how it was wiping out their home income, their small business. 2 hours. Similarly, I was in Fairbanks just a few days ago and heard from another small business owner, and they made the same plea that many small business owners I've heard from in Alaska have talked about. They've had health insurance for their employees for years where they've taken care of them. And yet, the increases in the cost of these plans are such that their companies won't be able to operate. So they have this huge dilemma: continue to cover their employees who they care a lot about, some have been working for them for decades, or dump them into the marketplace, because that's the only way the company can survive. That's the dilemma that this bill is putting people into. Hardly a day passes where I don't hear from constituents about the problems they're having. Let me give you a couple examples. A family in Eagle River, Alaska, $1,200 a month premium with a $10,000 deductible under the new Affordable Care. A couple in Anchorage will be paying $3,131 a month in premiums, almost $38,000 a year. Here's an excerpt from a constituent letter. Quote, "The renewal paperwork that I just received estimated that our new payment to be just over $1,000 a month, doubling our monthly expense. What is a young family to do?" Unquote. Here's another constituent. Quote, "There is nothing affordable about the Affordable Health Care Act." Another constituent. Quote, "Insurance rates are killing my small business. We have tried to keep our employees and their families covered, but we don't see how we can do it and continue to be in business." Here's another constituent of mine. Quote, "Please, please help us." Unquote. Begging for help. Teachers, construction workers, small business owners, self-sufficient Alaskans, so many of them asking for help because of what this federal government did to them. Madam President, the numbers don't lie. In Alaska and throughout the country, workers and families are suffering. Small businesses are being squeezed. Job creation is being stymied. Nearly every single promise made by the President of the United States and the supporters of this bill in the Congress has been broken. Let me remind my colleagues what some of those were. Here's one from the President. Quote, "If you like your health care plan, You'll be able to keep your health care plan, unquote. Here's another one from the president. If you like your doctor, you'll be able to keep your doctor. The law, he told the American people, means, quote, more choice, more competition, and lower costs for millions of Americans. He told the American public that premiums would be reduced on average for Americans with their health care plans by $2,500. Reduced. But again, the numbers that we see don't lie. Costs are soaring all over our country. For example, a bronze plan under Obamacare, the least expensive insurance available on the exchange, costs on average, now this is national average, $420 a month with an average deductible of $5,653 for an individual and close to $11,600 for a family. Deductible. Former Speaker of the House and Obamacare promoter Nancy Pelosi. Remember Speaker Pelosi with her line about how important it was to pass Obamacare so we could all figure out what was in it? She promised that Obamacare, quote, would create 4 million jobs, 400,000 jobs almost immediately, unquote. That was a former speaker. Let's see what the Congressional Budget Office says about that promise. Recently, the CBO projected that Obamacare will result in 2 million fewer jobs in 2017 and 2.5 million fewer jobs in America by 2024. So obviously that promise didn't come true. Promise after promise, unfulfilled. It's no wonder the American people have such a low opinion of the federal government and the Congress. And what of the laudable goal of health insurance for the uninsured? Very laudable goal, no doubt about it. Affordable health insurance for the uninsured. Obamacare is barely moving the needle. Today there are 35 million people who don't have health insurance. 10 years from now, according to the CBO, there are still going to be approximately 27 million who don't have coverage under this system. And let me get a little more specific in terms of my state. Probably no other state in the country has been more negatively damaged by Obamacare than Alaska. 5 insurance companies originally offered coverage in our exchanges in Alaska, offering a glimmer of hope of what's really needed in the healthcare market, which is competition. Today, only 2 are left to provide individual insurance on the healthcare exchange. Both will be increasing premiums by approximately 40% this year. In Anchorage, my hometown, the lowest level plan, a bronze plan, premiums are going to go up 46%. There you go. Major metropolitan areas in the United States. Look at the far left. That's Anchorage, Alaska. 46% in 1 year, which will make it one of the most expensive and the biggest increase in terms of metropolitan areas in the United States. Let me give you another example. 40-year-old non-smoker individual who doesn't receive subsidies will pay anywhere from $579 to $678 a month in premiums for a bronze plan with a deductible of either $5,250 for the more expensive premium or $6,850 for the less expensive premium. And remember, Obamacare requires Alaskans and Americans to purchase these plans. Remember what it did. For the first time in U.S. history, the Congress of the United States told the American people, you must buy a product. You have to, or you will be penalized. That brings me to the penalties. Because of the prohibited costs, some in Alaska and many across the country have chosen to go without coverage and pay the yearly fine under Obamacare. But that fine is also very expensive. So Alaskans are asking, and Americans are asking, what's the point? What's the point of having health insurance that's been forced on them by their federal government that they can't afford? And others are just foregoing seeing their doctors altogether. A recent Gallup poll found that in 2014, 1 in 3 Americans say that they have put off getting medical treatment that they or their family members need because with these numbers, it's just too expensive. So they're just not going to the doctor. Again, what's the point? Health insurance, but you can't go see your doctor because it's too expensive. That number, by the way, 1 in 3, is among the highest number in the Gallup poll's 14-year history of posing this question. And as the costs rise, the numbers will continue to rise. So not surprisingly, given all these numbers, given that number, a recent poll found that despite 6 years of being under Obamacare, where the United States, our citizens were supposed to finally be comfortable with it, to understand it, to have it working, still 52% of Americans have an unfavorable view of it, only 44 favorable. And for Alaskans, this is only going to get worse. The so-called Cadillac tax, one of the numerous taxes embedded in Obamacare, is going to kick in 2018. It will be devastating for individual Alaskans, for union members, and for small businesses across Alaska. It's been estimated that as many as 90% of Alaska businesses will be faced with the increased Cadillac tax. That is a tax of 40% additionally on these benefits. Because many small businesses in Alaska will not be able to afford this. For example, an employer with 20 employees under the Cadillac tax will pay an estimated $28,000 a year more just in taxes, just in the Cadillac tax on a small business. $28,000, that could be the difference between make or break for that business. Who's going to get hurt by this? Small businesses, but more importantly, their employees, their workers, because those extra costs are going to trickle down to the workers, likely in the form of reduced benefits and reduced wages, and more problems with their health insurance plan. And as I mentioned, it's just not small businesses. Hardworking Alaskans covered under union plans will also very likely be hit by the Cadillac tax, requiring them to pay much more. So will state and local government employer plans. For all of these reasons, Madam President, one of my campaign promises was to vote to repeal Obamacare. And I certainly plan to do it today when we take up this reconciliation measure. Now, I certainly hope it's going to pass. We get this to the President's desk. What's going to happen then? Well, it's likely he's going to veto it again. I hope he looks at these numbers and recognizes what a mistake this bill was and agrees with us to work together to replace it. But he's likely going to veto it. And in doing so, he'll likely mislead Americans again by claiming that Obamacare is working. It's not working. Let me give you another example of how it's not working. United Health, one of the nation's biggest insurance companies, recently announced that because of its huge losses, it may pull out of Obamacare altogether. If United pulls out, then others are likely to follow. Premera Blue Cross and Blue Shield of Alaska, one of the only health insurers left in Alaska offering coverage on the exchange, has indicated it has problems to continue sustained losses under the exchanges. As bad laws often do, Obamacare contains the seed of its own destruction. But for the sake of millions of Americans, thousands of Alaskans who have been sold a false bill of goods, we can't simply wait to see it self-destruct. This was not the health care that was promised to Americans. And we can't let it get worse. We need to act. And that's why I'm joining with my colleagues today to repeal this law. And we need to look at replacing it with one that includes provisions that are missing. Tort reform. A system that you can encourage purchasing insurance across state lines. Encourages patient-centered care. And allows the kind of doctor-patient relationship that has been the hallmark of American care for many, many years. Contrary to what some of the others on the other side of the aisle claim, there have been many alternatives proposed to Obamacare. The plan in the Senate has been introduced by Senators Hatch and Burr, and Congressman Fred Upton on the House side, has many of these important reforms and will allow people to actually get involved in their own health care and not watch this train wreck in terms of health care becoming unaffordable for Americans throughout all the different states. Madam President, when selling the law to the public, President Obama talked about the fierce urgency of now. That's exactly what I'm hearing from my constituents when they write, please, please help us. What is a young family to do? The fierce urgency of now is now. Finally, I'd like to comment on a number of my colleagues on the other side of the aisle who have been lamenting that this reconciliation vote that we're going to take today is going to be along party lines. They've been lamenting that this might be some kind of partisan vote. Now, Madam President, as you know, this is a bit rich. It's a bit ironic. It's very important to remember that 6 years ago, almost to the day, in this body, this legislation passed the Senate and the House by a party line vote. Partisan vote. So to hear the concerns now rings a little hollow. That was not a wise move back then. One important lesson of U.S. history is that most, if not all, major pieces of legislation in the Congress on important social issues have been passed with bipartisan majorities. That helps them be sustainable. And that happens when the American people back that kind of legislation. The American people have never backed this legislation. But democracy has an interesting way of working. Not always quickly, but eventually. This law is not popular. It was never supported by the American people, and they are noticing. As a matter of fact, of the 60 U.S. senators who voted for this law 6 years ago, 30 are no longer in this chamber. That is democracy working. So we're going to take that vote again today. I'm hoping some of my colleagues on the other side of the aisle will join us in repealing a law that doesn't work, that's dramatically harming Americans, and we move on to health care that does, that helps us, that helps families, and prevents constituents to writing their members of the Senate begging for help, which is what's going on right now because of this bill. Madam President, I yield the floor.